Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's coffee chat on labor rights and decent work. My name is Paula Boland, and I am the president of the UN Association of the National Capital Area, one of the largest and most active chapters of the UN Association of the USA, which mission is to educate about the vital work of the UN and to mobilize support for a strong US-UN partnership. We serve over 1,200 members through a variety of educational programs and advocacy activities in the DMV area. So if you're not a member already, please join our movement and get actively involved. You can visit our website at UNA-NCA.org and learn more about who we are and what we do. Labor rights are both legal rights and human rights relating to labor relations between workers and employers. These rights are confided in national and international labor and employment law. In general, these rights influence working conditions in relations of employment. Respect for workers' rights and compliance with labor standards are the foundation of decent work. Despite progress, decent work deficits remain alarmingly widespread. Advancing decent work and raising the living standards of all workers across operations require employers to adopt sustainable, responsible, and inclusive workplace practices. COVID-19 brought to our attention the pressing needs that workers face and the limited remedies many have to protect themselves in the face of major crises and disruptions. We are seeing a rise in layoffs at a time when corporate profits are at a high. Simultaneously, major corporate branches like Starbucks, Trader Joe's, and Amazon warehouses have seen a sudden increase in unionization despite a steady decline of union membership since 2017, with approval rates for unions at its highest since 1965. What does this change mean for the future of workers' rights? What can workers do to work together locally and internationally to ensure the rights are protected? With that, we're delighted to have our esteemed panelists and partners who can provide more awareness around what exactly are labor rights. What does decent work for all mean? And how can we as a membership organization engage in these efforts? It is now my pleasure to pass it on to our Advocacy and Outreach Coordinator, Rafaela, Demerath, who will moderate today's conversation. Thank you very much for participating. Rafi?
Thank you, Paula, and thank you everyone for being here today to participate in what I think is a really prevalent conversation. If this is your first time attending, welcome. There's a couple ground rules I wanted to lay down. Number one, participate. Please comment questions. We'll be giving about 10 to 15 minutes at the end of this coffee chat for questions from the audience. And I'm just absolutely thrilled today to be with this incredible group of panelists. And I think they provide so much knowledge and so much resources. And I think if you're attending this, it means you either care about labor rights or you want to learn more. And so for that reason, our team at UNA-NCA has been working on an advocacy toolkit, which will provide you with resources to continue advocacy efforts in the DMV, as well as a list of organizations that are working already, some of which are here with us today, to protect workers' rights in the DMV. And we will be sending that in a follow-up email after this event. And to continue to learn about events like these and participate in them, you should absolutely subscribe to the UN Express. This is the UNA-NCA weekly newsletter that I will be dropping a link in the chat for you to subscribe, or you can join as a member today. Without further ado, I am honored to introduce our stellar panel today, including Kevin Cassidy, with nearly 4 decades of international development experience. Mr. Cassidy is currently the director and representative to the Bretton Woods and Multilateral Organizations for the International Labor Organization, ILO, for the United States. Prior to this appointment, Mr. Cassidy served as the Senior Communications and Economic Social Affairs Officer for 11 years in the ILO office for the United Nations. He has worked in several UN offices during his career, including the Department of Peacekeeping Operations, the Office of the Coordination of Humanitarian Assistance, the Executive Office of the Secretary General, and the UN Department of Public Information. Mr. Cassidy holds a Master's of Economic and Political Development from Columbia University School of International and Public Affairs. We are also joined today by Nadia Salazar. Nadia Salazar Sandi is a Bolivian immigrant who moved to the US at age 10 with her parents, seeking opportunity and safety. Her family ended in Wheaton, Maryland. As a mixed status family, fear of family separation was always real and present. Nadia started community organizing after the Federal Dream Act failed by 5 votes in 2010. The understanding of responsibility and the need to step up led her to obtain a degree in psychology from UMBC, USG, and fight back. Her organizing career goes from unionizing farm workers in North Carolina to supporting teachers and students in Louisiana, all the way to working with youth all over the DMV. As an advocate, she has focused her fight in supporting youth and workers in the DMV area and was one of the youngest chief of staff in Annapolis during the 2016 session. Along with her passion for organizing, she is a folkloric dancer for the local Bolivian community group and a new mom to baby Luna. She is incredibly involved with local organizing, the Wheaton community, and the Bolivian community as a whole. And last but not least, we are joined by Christie Smith. Christie Smith is the Director of Employment Services at AsylumWorks, a DC-based nonprofit that works with asylum seekers and humanitarian migrants. With over a decade of experience working alongside refugees, asylum seekers, and migrants, Christie's passion is for fostering inclusive education and career spaces for English language learners. She holds a BA in Global Studies, an MA in International Education Policy, and a graduate certificate in Nonprofit Management, all from Maryland universities. In her current work, she supports asylum seekers in their short and long-term career development. And with that, let's begin chatting. I'm excited to start this series of questions with Kevin here today. From the ILO, we'd love to learn more about what US engagement with the ILO looks like in regards to labor rights and what the current priorities are that the ILO is working on to ensure decent work in the United States. Pass it off to you.
Great, Rafi, thanks very much. And Paula, thanks very much for inviting me and our continued partnership. Maybe to answer the second part first, in terms of the current priorities. Certainly for the ILO, it's always been about ensuring decent work and making sure that it is essential, that it is a cornerstone of building forward better. We want to make sure that we're addressing a multiplicity of issues as we move forward, building back from the COVID-19 pandemic, which basically had almost shut down the entire world of work for us here, but also the impact it's had on the ground. Secondly, we are focused really on a couple of key issues here in the US, and eliminating gender-based violence and harassment in the world of work is something that's really quite important to us. And we've started actually engaging with other parts of the US government, which I'll speak about in a moment. Occupational safety and health this year has now been adopted as a fundamental right, alongside no forced labor, no child labor, no discrimination, and freedom of association and collective bargaining. A healthy workforce is a productive workforce, and the opposite is also true as well, too. In other areas, global supply chains are coming very much to the fore for the ILO, and we're having discussions right now about how we develop the building blocks to ensure a better global supply chain. We work very closely with other parts of the government on trade agreements, but also, I think more importantly, looking at the labor rights also from the point of the business side. You know, we want to ensure that businesses have legal certainty for operations. When you have your global supply chains and maybe you don't have visibility past your first or second tiers, that may create problems for businesses. So we're here also to help businesses, because without businesses investing in jobs, we don't have gainful employment for ourselves. And then, of course, lifelong learning. Now, if you'll give me one more minute just to say that we work mostly internationally, so working with the Department of Labor, iLab, working with the Department of State, working with USAID and others, but we're also starting to work domestically around the United States with municipal offices. I'm working very closely, for example, with the World Affairs Council of America, which is having its national conference this week. And in that, we're getting together with people who are looking at the just transition. And we're seeing opportunities for engagement and being able to share knowledge and policies that work around the world. So I'm very excited about that. We also work directly with businesses in the United States giving them ideas about how they can improve their engagement, looking at ESG performance, environmental, social, and governance, why that's important. Working with UNA-NCA on our first model ILO here in Washington, D.C., which we're looking forward to in the beginning of next year, but also reaching out to universities, working with the Labor and Employment Relations Association, LERA, DC LERA here, as well as media. So although we do have an international focus, I think what we're understanding here is that people in the US are concerned about work just like people everywhere else in the world. And we need to bring those issues to the fore here, and we stand ready to work on that and to push that forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kevin. And we completely understand the importance of bringing the international to the local level. And we're so excited to hear you doing that domestically. And I feel like it just perfectly, it's a seamless transition to the next question with Nadia, who is working at a very local level here in the DMV. So Nadia, you've been working with workers and unions for many years now by organizing and building solidarity amongst these workers. So specifically for the DMV, what do you see as some of the most promising opportunities, and as well as some of the biggest risks or most worrisome trends in this area?
Yeah, thank you so much, Rafi, Paula, and both panelists. Thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited to learn from all of you. I think it's interesting to hear about the international work that's happening because it reflects things that are happening locally, right? Something that resonated with me that Kevin said is eliminating just gender-based violence. And that's something that happens everywhere, right? We're looking at women being more prevalent in construction now. How do we get into that industry with this focus on women and ensuring that they're being heard? So some of the things that are promising that are coming up, I mean, you have the wins from Amazon and Starbucks workers. That's monumental wins at these huge companies, and people are seeing hope. Right? That's a huge opportunity. You have an infrastructure bill that's going to create around 1.5 million jobs a year for the next 10 years. What that means for unions, what that means for workers is if we're organized and we're prepared, that money can go to the right places. That money can go to people that need that money, that can do the work, that are excited to do the work, that are represented and that are respected. And here locally, a couple of the things that I'm excited about, as you all might know, the DC chapter of the Domestic Workers Alliance has been working on what they call the Domestic Worker Bill of Rights, which essentially expands protections to domestic workers who've been left out of the FLSA and Worker Bill of Rights. And so essentially is bringing this to the forefront, right? This eliminating gender-based violence, because who are mostly domestic workers, right? Predominantly immigrant Black and brown women. And so that's one of the things I'm really excited about. It brings a lot of hope to DC. We have vendor decriminalization that's it's in legislation right now. 2 bills, one of them decriminalizing vending in general, and the other one creating vending zones, or expanding the vending zones essentially to Columbia Heights. And so those 2 things are really, really important for workers locally. They're giving us a lot of hope in terms of organizing, in terms of opportunity, in terms of being something that we have to look forward to. So that's some of the things that we're looking forward to. However, it's scary, right? COVID has shown that workers are at risk. COVID has shown that workers don't matter to big companies. Many people say, what did you do during COVID? I was canvassing and talking to laborers. Laborers did not stop working. Your utilities needed to be running. Your streets needed to be working. People were out in the streets. And so one of the things that scares me is post-COVID mentality, once people are over this urgency, right, that we have in understanding the importance of these people's works, is that they're going to push people aside and say, we no longer need you, we no longer see your importance. So that's something that kind of scares me, but I'm using as an urgency tool to organize folks.
That's good to know, that there was sort of a wake-up call when it came to COVID, but then also that we might be losing a little bit of steam there. And I'm also excited to hear that there's, protections around the people of Columbia Heights. I lived there for a short period of time, and I loved seeing the vendors there with, oh my God, such delicious food. Okay, I'll pass it on to Christie now. So not all individuals, as you know, have the same access or level of protections when it comes to labor rights. You work with asylum seekers and humanitarian migrants who have different levels of protections and vulnerabilities. What are some things that many people may not know or understand about their access to employment? And what are some of the key barriers facing asylees or migrant workers?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question and in general for having me here today. It's been great, like Nadia said, to learn from the other panelists and just to be in this space with everyone. So thank you to all. The organization that I work with, AsylumWorks, we work with all asylum seekers and humanitarian migrants, but within the employment program at this time, I am working alongside a group of individuals who have highly professional backgrounds from their home countries. All of our clients are work authorized or eligible to become work authorized at some point, which is a bit of a unique category, but they differ from refugees in that refugees, when they come here, are serviced by the resettlement agencies, and that is not accessible to asylum seekers or parolees or TPS. Well, it depends, but on the whole, parolees have less access to those services. So they come to our organization and we provide a plethora of services to them. But by the time they get to employment, I am working alongside people who have master's degrees, PhDs, we're executive directors of nonprofits, really high level roles. And there are a lot of things that they face when trying to translate those skills here. I'll just talk very briefly about 6 things that we see a lot, although this is just a small sampling and there are many more. The one thing is that education systems in the US are different from education systems abroad. The prime example that I always think of is in a lot of other countries, it's common to have something called a bachelor's of medicine, which credentials people to become doctors. So we see it as just a bachelor's degree, and then we don't in this country allow those degrees to translate to becoming a full doctor. But in other countries, it's a very thorough, more than 4-year degree, and it fully equips someone to become a medical professional. But it's this is just one of many examples of the degree not allowing someone to do what they are professionally equipped to do. There are ways of becoming recertified, there are complicated tests, but it's a very long process. And this is true of many professions. English language, of course, and our clients are at various levels of English. The job search process in the US is just different. In a lot of other countries, you might have to take an exam to get a job. The cover letter is not something that a lot of clients are familiar with. And CVs and resumes look very different in the US than in other places. Jobs in the US, 80% are found through networking. And when somebody is new to this country, they have a very limited network. And so it's really hard for them to make those inroads. A lot of our clients start out by just applying on ads they see on LinkedIn or Indeed. And that is in reality just how such a small percentage of jobs are actually given. So we're really trying to get people to go out and meet other professionals in their field, but it takes a long time to build up like a solid base, a solid network base. And then many of our clients have long gaps in employment, which lots of employers will raise as red flags just by nature of the process of having to flee, or some of our clients were imprisoned for a while. The nature of being an asylum seeker means that there has been a very substantial, significant transition in their life. And so the gap in employment is challenging. And the last thing I want to say, because this one has really been a challenge for us. A lot of our clients who have these very high level degrees and experiences back in their home country, when they apply for their equivalent positions in this country, they're told that they first need to have some sort of US work experience. But then when they try to apply for those entry-level jobs, they're told that they're overqualified. That's the feedback that we get a lot from employers. So having this finding that middle ground is really difficult. And I have a client right now who had she was the director of an organization, and she has removed that from her resume. She wants to appear to organizations like she's an entry-level candidate because she's so tired of being rejected for the reason of being overqualified. So those are some of many things that we're seeing. And I'm happy, I think, at a later point to talk about then, unfortunately, the exploitation that our clients face when they are physically in their work. All are eligible to work legally with work authorization, although that certainly shouldn't mean, not having that shouldn't mean that people can't work safely, but that's a different conversation. But our clients do have work authorization, but their rights are not often, or I shouldn't say often, but their rights are not always protected, even in having that.
Thank you, Christie. Yeah, it sounds like an impossible ask of them in many ways and an endless cycle. It reminds me of this phrase that I learned when it came to a different situation, but low-income students entering private, typically white institutions like universities, this thing called the hidden curriculum, where a lot of students didn't know what office hours were, that you were supposed to engage with professors. And it's the same thing when entering this world of finding a job, knowing that you're supposed to network, knowing the length of what like average length of a resume or a cover letter. It's just not clear unless you are in the know and you know this hidden curriculum. Well, this next question is for all of you. Some of you have already addressed it, but I would love to hear a deeper dive into exactly the impacts of this pandemic and what that means for labor rights and workers' protections here in the DMV, internationally, and for asylees and migrant workers. I'll pass it off to you, Kevin, first.
Thanks very much. I think what we see has happened as a consequence of COVID-19 was already in the works for many, many years before that. So COVID-19 exacerbated existing trends. So what were some of the negative things that we have seen? So essential workers are the worst treated and the worst paid. I mean, these are people who are on the ground, driving the buses, cleaning the streets, stocking the shelves, repairing bicycles. I mean, these are people who make the cities tick. They make the cities work. But yet many of them previously could not even afford to live where they work. So they incur additional costs. Many of them don't have career opportunities for advancement. They did not have healthcare insurance, like a lot of people in healthcare who are hired by third agencies themselves. They did not have access to healthcare. Secondly, on the negative vulnerability, women, youth, and migrants have fared abysmally poorly during the COVID-19. They were the ones on the front line by consequence of having jobs, whether it's in restaurants or accommodations or in hospitality. They're the ones who suffered the most. And they're the ones, unfortunately, at a higher rate were becoming ill. So very, very difficult situation for them. For the business side, they can't fill jobs. And there's a reason for that, right? And I'll get into it in a moment, but they call it the Great Resignation. It wasn't that. It's the Great Reassessment. People realize that I'm in the workplace. Why do I want to work in a job that pays me so poorly, gives me some benefits? I can't advance in here. I'll do the same job now I'll be doing for 20 years. I'll string together 3 or 4 activities to create a livelihood for myself. That is unacceptable. So I think businesses have to realize it's not that people don't want to work or the government gave them too much money. It's just that you have to treat them better. Also, we realize that global supply chains are not good at responding to massive shocks, such as climate change, the pathogens, low workforce participation, transportation costs, but they also are not very good at disputing or sharing the benefits of the prosperity. So I think that is another thing. And then, of course, our social safety nets are threadbare. The fact of providing for our citizens, providing for people was difficult. I'll just end on a positive note to say that particularly in the industrial market economy countries, young people are starting to demand respect at work. We see unionization efforts. I interviewed a young man in Salt Lake City in Utah. He was the one who was organizing in those big coffee shops. And what had happened to him? I mean, the story was very simple. Beforehand, shift manager, 30 people working for him, $17.50 an hour. COVID struck, workforce down from 30 to 10, hourly rate from $17.50 down to $9 an hour, and they kept the lobby open so people came in. And when that happened, everybody got COVID and were impacted upon that. And when they started demanding their rights, many of these people were let go. So I think that is absolutely unacceptable, but I'm really encouraged by the fact that young people are standing up and starting to unionize and demand their rights. The last 3 points are the importance of employees for business continuity. Some businesses are now realizing that the most important resource that you have is a talented pipeline. You need good workers to come in and people who work hard. And when people are treated well in the workplace, they're more productive, they are more engaged, they can be your ambassador for your brand. So don't treat your workers as if it is just a cost. You know, people are not commodities. People come there with skills and talents and aspirations, and they want to do a good job. I mean, we all want to do well because we want to provide for our families, for ourselves, and have a sense of self-actualization or self-worth. So really treating people well is so important. And then the last positive aspect is that we now realize that lifelong learning is absolutely essential. You can no longer front load your education with 16 or 22 years of education and work off of that for 40 years. It doesn't happen. We're going to be having to credential people, micro-credential them, stacking those credentials. We're going to have to respond to this. But I think what's most important is that people start to realize this, but who is going to pay? Is it the individual? Is it the business? Is it the government? I think we need to get together as a consortium and look at these issues, and who benefits the most from a talented pipeline? Businesses. So really look at that, and that is going to increase your bottom line and your top line. So for me, those are the elements that I've seen coming out of COVID.
Well said. I love to hear the term the great reassessment, because I couldn't agree more. I'm going to pass it off to you, Nadia, to answer the same question.
Yeah, you know, a lot of the things that Kevin said are true and evident, right? Like it just made things faster. It made us realize things much faster. The other piece is that us at DC Jobs with Justice, we're a coalition of labor organizations, community groups, faith-based organizations, student groups. So we heard from everyone. And one of the things that we noticed is that there were safeguards that were placed for people that were in the economy, but not people in the cash economy. So undocumented folks, sex workers, people who work under the table, there wasn't a safeguard for people to actually have, you know, some type of backing like unemployment. So that's another piece that I think we realized as a community of what are the things that we're using or putting together to protect people that might not be in this structured economy that we've created, because we can't ignore that the cash economy doesn't exist. Right. And so now, again, when I go into construction sites, when I go into different groups of people that are working, when I talk to them, they look completely different than before the pandemic. And I don't mean the makeup of the group that are there. I mean the need of being there, right? Like I was in this industry for 30 years. I was a chef. That place no longer exists. I've been pushed into doing construction. So what Kevin said in like, we have to reassess and we have to give people this opportunity. We have to be able to invest in them, because at the end of the day, who does benefit is the business. Our community work, we produce, and the benefit goes to the business, right? So COVID-19 has shown that all of us in whatever economy we live are a contributing factor, and we're very valuable. And so I think it has also raised, I think like Kevin said, right? Young people are pissed off. We're not okay with being treated poorly at work. We're not okay with getting tip minimum wage, which was just voted on in DC, right? People should get the minimum wage. Tip and minimum wage is crazy. $5.35 an hour cannot allow you to survive, right? So this term for bread and roses, and I don't know those in the labor movement who've been around understand it, but it's like not enough to survive, but enough to thrive and enough to have the things that you want to do out of comfortability and out of luxury, right? I think that's the mentality that now the new working force is growing up with, and I love it. I'm really excited to see what else it's going to bring.
I'm excited to hear your excitement. I am gonna try to combine a couple of questions because I really want to hear both of them answered. And first, if you could name it, what do you think is the most pressing issue in labor rights advancement this year? And so for Christie, for example, specifically when it comes to migrants and asylees and refugees, for Nadia, specifically within the DMV, and then for Kevin internationally, as you see it. And then what can we do as members here at UNA-NCA to support that? I'll begin with you, Christie.
Yeah, there's so many things. I think one thing that has become abundantly clear is that there really needs to be more work on the part of employers to kind of reevaluate how they are treating applicants. And I know that all panelists have kind of touched on this so far. But yes, people are demanding more rights. It's fantastic to see. But specifically when it comes to internationally educated, internationally trained applicants, people who were even just born in other countries and are starting the workforce here. For people to really, employers to really consider, like, how essential is it that this person speaks 100% fluent or near fluent, near native English to complete these job responsibilities to the way that we expect them to be completed? Are we willing to take a chance on somebody whose credentials might not line up in the way that we've expected them to in the past, but who has all of these amazing experiences elsewhere? I think that just asking employers to be a little bit more open-minded when they're looking at candidates, and thinking a lot more about transferable skills as well. And luckily, there are some organizations right now that are doing some great work when it comes to like bringing employers and large businesses together to have these conversations and talk about diversity. But I think more activism when it comes to employers specifically. Pay is always going to be, I know that the other panelists have talked about this a lot, but our clients, one thing that I think is a bit of a challenge is in other countries, or I realize I'm speaking very broadly when I keep saying other countries, but a lot of our clients come from contexts where it was sufficient for one person in the household to work. And so we see a lot of women, for example, who are being forced to work for the first time in their lives because they came from contexts where it was fine for them to just get by on their husband working. Or now like adult children who really want to go into higher education. Maybe they're like 19, 20 years old and they're being forced to work as well, because even with two parents earning minimum wage, that's still not enough to support a household of 5 or 6. And so I think that the reevaluating of minimum wage and pay in general, also, I think that that's going to be, sorry, I'm a little all over the place. But yeah, really this idea of being able to get by with 2 working adults and to provide for a household, that should be sufficient, and that would have a big impact on our clients. The last thing I'll say is it's been encouraging to see the movement, the discussion around the necessity of higher education. And I really like what Kevin was saying about about lifelong learning and ongoing credentialing, because I think that I think that shows an openness to look at other types of credentials and other types of skills. And I think people are realizing that there's ways that they can show value that don't require the traditional degree. So it's been nice kind of seeing that blossoming questioning of the need for a bachelor's degree or beyond.
Thank you so much, Christie. And I think it makes perfect sense. I think the simple act of open-mindedness is something that we can all do every single day, and we can carry that with us as we hire new people and network with people as well, and lift people up with us as we move through this wild ladder / playground that is the labor world. But I'll pass it off to Kevin next to answer this question about the most pressing issue, as well as what we can do as members.
Right. Sometimes I wonder, there are so many pressing issues, how do we prioritize? So maybe just a couple here. I mean, certainly for the ILO, and because we are based on this, the ILO is based on decent work and social justice. And social justice is so important because we want to make sure that no one is left behind. We want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity for self-realization, self-actualization, and that they are treated well under the law. So for the ILO, what we often say is that we are here to protect people, not to protect jobs. Jobs are always changing. We want to make sure that people are skilled and ready for those jobs, and that businesses accept people, and work with them as valuable employees. So certainly social justice. Also, we need stronger forms of social dialogue. We use the word social a lot. What I'm meaning is people to people, right? I mean, that's what social is. It's people in the world. and discussing these issues with employers. Some of them get it. Some of them are very good at this, right? Others don't. And sometimes they don't get it because they just don't understand the implications of that. But when you have stronger dialogue between the employer side and the worker side of the house, you're going to actually have greater productivity. You're going to have greater share of market. You're going to have greater, greater talent pipeline. People want to work for companies that they admire. So the better that you treat your employees, if you really want to have a strong workplace, you want to have a good brand, really just start talking to them. I think also overall, we need to strengthen that social contract. I think a lot of people have seen that the government may have left them behind for a number of reasons. That may mean that they didn't have strong social safety nets, or that they were left to their own devices, or in many countries around the world where people who were already desperately poor have now fallen further back into it. 90 million people have been pushed into abject poverty due to COVID-19. That's a reality. That has exacerbated the situation that was already there. The last two issues, if I may, in terms of looking at these important issues, as I mentioned before, addressing the issue of women in the workforce. Women have three barriers, largely globally, in the workforce. One is childcare. This was absolutely essential during COVID-19. We don't have childcare provisions available. An employer puts childcare in there. They were going to have a dedicated staff member who is going to be more, productive. There's somebody who doesn't have to worry about where the kids are. And COVID-19 showed us we just can't have anybody come into the household. So we want to make sure that that we get more women into the workforce. So childcare, gender-based violence and harassment in the workplace. I think this is something that is absolutely critical and essential. ILO's Convention C-190 and the work we're doing with the Women's Bureau of the Department of Labor around the United States to make people aware of it is quite important. And then the last issue for women in the workforce is pay equity. And then maybe just to close, that the most important, if I were to tell people, what should you think about? Don't think about people who work for you, just as a cost, right? We are not just, workers, we're also stakeholders. If I don't have a job, I cannot afford the things that I want to put on the table for myself and my family. And so just looking at the shareholder side of that equation is absolutely, short-sighted. You need to see people as, trading their skills, their talent, their industry, their time in a good going concern that is going to help that business move forward. So economic growth and social progress can move forward together. That's the main message.
Couldn't agree more. I think really bringing up the social contract is so important because it's such a personal and intimate thing. I think we forget that it is just people to people, and you need to have that respect and trust that you can invest in people. They're not commodities, they're not just workers, they are a part of your community in many ways, and when they thrive, we all do. I will now transition. I think I want to keep asking you my own questions, but I think we're going to have to go towards the audience. I would love to get their questions out to you as well. We have a couple questions that were submitted ahead of time with our form, but we also have some from the audience. I will begin with one for you, Nadia. This was from online. Somebody asked if you could address the added value of union presence in boosting workers' benefits and pay, especially the impact on women and people of color.
Yes, absolutely. I think, well, first of all, having a union means representation, right? Like I tell people all the time, like I'm an only child and I couldn't get things done in my house very much because if I had siblings, I would have organized them and would have been able to organize our parents. There's more power in a union. I think we all know that. I mean, one, it's higher wages. Union members are 11.2%, make 11.2% more than non-union workers, right? There's also access to employer-paid healthcare. 96% compared to 69% non-union members have access to employer healthcare. There's also access to paid sick leave, right? We have this new amazing law in DC, but not many places have 12 weeks to take care of yourself and take care of your children or take care of a loved one. But if you have a union, you're 86% more than likely to have that than 72 if you're in a non-union space. So there are always benefits in terms of money when you're getting paid, in terms of representation. But I think now, particularly for women of color, for Black women, for communities of color that have been disenfranchised and marginalized from a lot of union spaces, to be completely honest with you, are also organizing internally. are creating those safe spaces, like our project that we're working with DC 51, the Painters Union, on women in construction, women that in trades, and talking about what does it mean to be in these sites as a woman, right? What are the things that you're facing, and having this union space has allowed for us to create this for other people. So I think it's not only beneficial for yourself, for your family, and for your community.
Thank you so much for that answer. Now, Christie, I have a question for you from, again, the online form we had. How does immigration status relate to precarious work conditions and pay?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Nadia would be in a great position to answer this as well, but I can only speak to people who are either of a refugee status, asylum seeker status. I mentioned this earlier, the one thing that is helpful to them is that they do have work authorization, which allows them to work legally. But it's one thing to have the rights. It's another thing to know what your work rights are. And then it's yet another thing to physically act on those rights. So we have unfortunately had many clients who have been quite taken advantage of by their supervisors, by their place of employment. When Kevin was talking about as soon as workers started standing up for themselves, they were dismissed. We've had that too, unfortunately. One example that comes to mind is a client of ours who very high level and was actually working for a local nonprofit, but he didn't have too many connections in the area, and he was regularly being asked to work well beyond his 40-hour a week. His boss often asked him to come in on Saturdays and Sundays and to work late most days of the week as well. And whenever he pushed back, his employer would say to him, well, you know, we don't really need you. We can just fire you if you don't do it. And his case manager and I kind of brainstormed some ways with him that he could push back on that a little bit. And he started to, but then they fired him. And so he certainly had cause for legal action, but when we brought this to his attention, he said he didn't want to burn bridges, he didn't want to cause trouble. And in talking to my boss, she said that in all of her time of doing this work, she's never seen anyone take legal action when they've had the right to. So I'm really grateful for the work of unions and for the labor organizers who are pushing for these rights to be upheld, because I think on an individual level, it can be very scary, especially when you're somebody who sees this country as a place of refuge or safety. To then be mistreated here as well, there's a sense that, well, I just have to sit back and take this. And even when people are saying to you, no, you don't, do you really want, it's a privilege to be able to push back. It's a privilege to be able to advocate for your rights. And I certainly don't blame our clients one bit for not wanting to be the person to ruffle those feathers. So that, and then, I mean, on a simpler scale, just our clients do often make minimum wage, even when they have PhDs. Our clients often are put in these entry-level positions where the pay is not good, and it's certainly not enough to cover the living costs of their family. I mentioned earlier also that even a 2-adult household is usually not enough to cover the family expenses. And we do see kids being pulled out of school, adults, like kids being pulled out of, adult children being pulled out of community college, and unfortunately into the workforce as well, because they need 3 or 4 adults earning income.
Thanks so much, Christie. Yeah, I mean, thank goodness for unions. At least there can be some collective protections there, and the single identity or bridge that could be burnt, you can kind of come together and protect each other rather than putting all the burden on just one person who might not have the privilege of risking it. Kevin, I have a question for you from the audience, from Deborah. Given the difficulties of ratifying international labor standards in the United States, as you well know, what do you think are the most promising avenues for promoting and implementing these standards here?
You know, it's an interesting question because as an official of an international organization, you know, we're often asked to do work over there. We're never really asked to do work here within our own country. So I think one of the things that that we've started to do, and I mentioned before about our convention 190 on violence and harassment in the workplace. So one of the things we decided to do is to work with local communities, work with local professionals, work with people who are in that space to develop these discussions, right? Sharing knowledge, sharing information on a regular and consistent basis, providing them with some templates of language from around the United States, from municipalities to counties about how legislation on gender-based violence and eliminating gender-based violence manifests itself in the US, and providing them for inspiration so they can take these laws themselves, develop them at the local level, and then from the bottom up, create that wellspring of support so that people can actually then create legislation which is consistent with the international provisions of our conventions, but without having to wait for the government at the federal level to sign it, ratify it, create the legislation and the like. So really getting out to the people, because there are wonderfully and dedicated and intelligent people around the United States who really believe in these issues. They know that it's going to help really jumpstart the economy. It's going to help over the longer term. So I think really, you know, sort of taking the opportunity to have a local impact with a global vision.
Couldn't agree more with that last sentiment there. Thank you so much, Kevin. One more question that could be maybe for Kevin, Nadia, and Christie, feel free to jump in as well. This is from Gayatri. If you could talk more about whether, in your view, the Biden administration's recent focus on strengthening the care economy, as Kevin, you were talking about, catalyzed by the disproportionate impact of COVID on women, will have a positive impact in reality. Kevin, do you want to start?
I'll defer to my other panelists here, and then I'll play cleanup.
Great.
Sure.
Okay.
Thank
Go
you,
ahead,
Kevin.
Nadia.
I think so. I always have like, it's great when I hear administrations and governments and entities say we're going to implement this wonderful thing. Love it. Is it actually going to happen? Who is going to monitor that? That is like always my worry. Like, so I'm always glad that so for example, just to give you an example, and it has nothing to do with this, but tip minimum wage, right? We were just talking about this. We've been advocating for a long time and saying that tip minimum wage shouldn't exist. We should just have minimum wage, right? We put it on the ballot. There was this entire discussion and conversation about it. Before that, DOES, the Department of Employment Services, they said, we just will put together a portal. Employers can put in, like, report the tip portal. It's a tip portal where they can report what they're paying their employees, right? We had to submit a FOIA to get this information. There's a report out that I will share with you all that says still in the dark because only 11% of these restaurants are reporting that. What does that tell me, right? There is a system in place. There's an entity in place that is supposed to be monitoring these things. Is it happening? No. Right. So I'm glad that things that they're saying it's going to happen, but then it becomes our job in the organizing field to ensure that our people are getting the money, to ensure that our people are getting the jobs, to ensure that our communities are being heard, even in this process of, you know, focusing on the care economy, which is predominantly migrant women, Black and brown women. So irregardless of who they want to focus on, ends up being the community who, I don't like using the word policing, but it's the best word that I can think of right now, who ends up policing like the things that are being passed, right? Is the community who ends up implementing, and we call them implementation campaigns, that make sure that those things actually happen. It's not the government entities, it's not the places that have said out that they would say that they would do those things. So good, but like.
Christie,
you are, sorry, I was just going to say, you're about as cynical as I am about some of the government-driven policies, and it does take the advocacy community and the organizing community to be kind of critical in how they're approaching some of these and really push for implementation. So thanks for that comment, Nadia.
If I may, I'm from New York, so I'm cynical to my bone, but I think the issue for me really is just that, the government can do certain amounts of work, right? They can structure this, they can put money against it, but they can't actually, make it all happen at once, right? You can't, legislate your way through this. So it does take, and consistent with what was just said, that you need people on the ground who are taking this on themselves. So civil society engagement, universities, students themselves, young people independently, professional organizations. So you really need to get people out there and really mobilizing. I'm very encouraged by the current administration. So, for example, National Strategy on Equity, Equity and Equality that came out in 2021, looking at clean energy, right? We're going to be building green. We're going to do a just transition, right? We have an opportunity here to look at women in the workforce issues, looking at those young people, about how we skill them, how we're bringing them in, better opportunities for them. The Empower initiative, which is coming out of largely Department of Labor, but it's a multilateral partnership on organizing workers and empowerment around the world. U.S. Trade Representative's Office are putting labor provisions into their trade agreements, particularly in USMCA. It's constraining the space of bad actors. The root causes strategy, looking at in the Central America. I was recently at the Summit of the Americas, and we worked with the U.S. Department of Labor, State, and USAID. And now there is guidelines on the Fair Recruitment Initiative, which the ILO believes in fully. So at the Indo-Economic Framework that's coming out, the Migration Management Strategy, there are a number of those, but they're all just big ideas until somebody actualizes it. And then maybe just to sort of close my comments to say that the one thing that I've noticed in my travels around with the World Affairs Council and the work I've been doing with other universities and so, is that a lot of people just don't know what these issues are and how to move it, right? I think when I talk to people about this, I just came from Hilton Head, I was in Peoria, I was in Burlington, I was in Salt Lake City, I was in Denver, I was, traveling around, getting to understand what people think about the world of work. And a lot of it is that people just don't know what is expected of them. People just don't know how these issues are important to them. So you have to come to where people are and discuss these issues. When a big city, like for example, Peoria, when Caterpillar pulled out many years ago because it couldn't compete anymore, it left the city to pick up the pieces. When Bethlehem Steel had left the Lehigh Valley, it left the people there to figure it out for themselves. So I think what we do need is we need people to be nimble, but we also need to share information. That's the one thing I think has to be done. These economic development, wastewater treatment, person power development, manpower, workforce development, they need to speak not only to each other, but to other cities and to link all that up, because there's a lot of good knowledge and a lot of really dynamic things happening across the US. But it reminds me of a cartoon years and years ago of a line of people ad infinitum with a little thought bubble that says, what can one person do? What can one person do? If we come together, we become a very powerful force for change. And that's what I encourage people to do today.
I absolutely love the image as well. I mean, so much of what I've learned about labor rights is solidarity and coming together. And despite our many differences, there is something that we have in common, is that we work, many of us, most of us. So I'm excited to hear you say that. And I want to thank you all for such an interesting conversation today. It's a subject that I'm still very much new to and learning about, as I'm sure many of our audiences, but I feel like I'm taking away a lot. I will be collecting all the resources that were mentioned in this coffee chat today and sharing it with you all. I highly encourage our audience to use them, to be active community members, to really take what we learned today and be in solidarity with our community, especially the people, as we learned, who have less protections and are more vulnerable. So be sure to check out your email. You'll be getting a follow-up soon with a recording of this event, as well as resources, lists of organizations that are doing this incredible work, and more. So again, thank you, Kevin, Christie, Nadia, for a wonderful conversation. I look forward to many, many more. And yes, let's hope we can all stay in touch and have a wonderful rest of your Monday, everybody.